As you can see, I have Junus on my lap, the most sphinx-like of the three cats to look at. It's something I want to come on to hopefully towards the end of this video, but there's a lot that is packed into this. Part of this video had already formulated, and then some new information came under my radar, shall we say, primarily from Silas Speaks channel, talking about these new hidden chambers that have been discovered under the Khafre pyramid, the other pyramid next to the Great Pyramid. But we'll come on to that hopefully towards the end of this video, or possibly in a subsequent video, because there is a lot I want to discuss, and it does all tie in together. So let's start with those number sequences, the 111, the 1111. Something I've touched on before, that the 111 is saying mind, body and soul, and the 1111 is actually adding spirit, soul, mind and body together, saying pull yourself together. That's a sort of a very loose explanation of those particular numbers. You can look up spiritual meanings of numbers, and if you happen to see certain numbers. But let's look at the process of what actually happens. How many times do you have a device in your hands and you're looking at something, you have the time in the corner and the percentage of the battery and so on, even like the duration of this video. Now it's there and we see it, but what actually grabs your attention to notice a particular number? It can also happen with things like voicemails. You may leave someone a voicemail and it comes out as 1 minute 11 seconds, or it might be the time that you've sent the voicemail. You might think, oh, it's 11 minutes past 1 in the afternoon. You may not have realized it, although it's there for you to see. So consider the process that has actually happened. What you've done is something inside you has grabbed your attention, that you happen to consciously notice those numbers, which of course then leads to the questions of why do I keep seeing these particular numbers, whatever the numbers happen to be. But look at the process of what has happened with this. Ask yourself, and this is that cliche saying, you already have the answers inside. So ask yourself these questions. When this happens, when you go through this experience, or the next time you go through this experience, consider, what were you doing? What were you thinking? What message were you relaying? What was the topic of what you were talking about? That, I feel, is a factor that comes into this. But what is it that actually alerted you to actually physically notice those numbers that were there anyway? That you suddenly say, oh, it's 111. It could have been 105, and you hadn't noticed that. But suddenly now it's 111, you notice it. I just happened to see 422 just come up on the timing of this recording. There's a prime example. So what is it? Because it's very much like that story of the photon. It behaves very differently in the way it's observed and not observed. I've never actually seen that. I've only ever seen cartoon explanations that show it. So, but if the thing is being observed even with a camera, would it be any different? Likewise, in this physical reality, People's behaviour will be very different if they are aware that they are being observed, or if it's more clandestine and they are being videoed or filmed and totally unaware of it. It comes back to this idea of the panopticon prison, as it were. Is there somebody in that thing observing everybody in this circular cells? Because it'll be two-way glass, as it's called, so they can see out but you can't see in. Same with, say, something like a speed camera. It may flash, but was there film actually in that camera that recorded anything? But of course, I've seen this happen a lot of times. People will go through a speed camera and it will activate and then it will break. And you see the red lights come up on the back of the vehicle, which is a bit strange really, because it's too late. It's a reaction. And the event has already happened. They were going beyond what was the speed limit, and this thing has activated. So just consider the process of what actually happens when you notice those numbers. But don't go too deep into it, because it'll end up as a rabbit hole. What does these numbers mean, and so on. See it more as a communication, as it were. What I would suggest is it's as above, so below. Because where does that sensation, shall we call it, that gets your attention to notice those numbers? And look at the word attention. It's at tense I on. You have your physical eyes to observe, but something inside comes up and it's like, oh, there's particular numbers, like 711 has just come up on the video. So the as above, so below is often linked with as within, so without. But I would also consider the sound and the spell. What if it is as above, S-O-W below? So what is in the mind, you sow in the physical sense as seeds in the ground, for example, or you're sowing seeds in the mind from that communication, shall we say, with higher self or with a supreme being, as it were. I added, now we've dropped some pieces of paper. I made a few bullet points for this video because it is rather long. So you've got as above, so below, as within, so without. So whatever is going on internally, you're sowing outwardly. There's also what I've suggested, two further parts to this. The first is, must it be? To which the answer is, it must be. Now that could be taken several ways. If you think something is a certain way, then this reality will present you with things that will validate that. So, for example, if you start looking into rabbit holes, this reality will give you things that take you further into that rabbit hole by saying, yes, what you found is right. Here's like a video lands in your lap on YouTube, for example, that sort of validates whatever you're looking into. And then, of course, there is the fourth part of this. So you've got as above, so below, as within, so without. Must it be? It must be. And the fourth part is, to know nothing is to know everything. But again, let's just change the spelling. Let's change the pause. So if we then restructure the phrase of that last one, to know nothing is to know everything. What if it is, to know nothing is to know everything? What do I mean by that? When we see the contrasts, things you would say, oh, that's bad, that's good, that's hot, that's cold, and so on, where you're making judgments on things rather than just seeing, without sort of having any fixed ideas, that you just observe and you can see things you could say, personally, I wouldn't go down that particular route. This particular route looks far more preferable, something that is going to benefit me, and so on. So you've got 4 parts of that, which also coincides with the 11-11. The next part of this video, I want to talk about the topic of letting go. Now, there are many interpretations of this, and some of these things seem to be cemented in, to which we normally then affix a negative connotation. So, for example, let's take today's date, March the 22nd. Maybe for 1 or 2 of you out there, that date has a specific significance. It may have been the day that you were proposed to. It may be the date that you got married. It may be the date that a close relative died. So every time that date comes round with this calendar system, you fix something to that date. You've basically engraved something into that date. You fixed to it, as it were. And of course, each time what comes up, what wells up inside, is the sadness, the loss. And it's not also with dates of calendars. It can be with, say, art or actual geographical locations. Oh, when I was here, this happened. Or when I heard this song, it was played at a funeral. And then you straight away attach to that piece of music, and you fix something very negative to it. But what about if you look at it as every time that comes up, that feeling inside, ask yourself that question: why is this coming up? Certainly I could see the negative to it, but can I sit through the discomfort of it, and can I find the positive in it? Because there is always a positive counterpart, because we're in a realm that has this perception of duality, so we can observe. It's, shall we say, eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So you can look at something and say, that's bad, that's good. But if you can come from that neutral perspective, and you can sit with the discomfort, say the sadness if it's a lost relative, for example, you can ask yourself, why is this coming up? Is it just a memory that you fix to that date, or to that association, that attachment to something that is external? Is there a positive that you can find in this? Because certainly one of the things that is being shown is, in the sense of linear time, that nothing is eternal. Things will change. Nothing will stay as it is. So people will exit from your life. But it's important to find that balance, because whether you judge that person, for example, to be good or bad, there will be something valuable for you to find in that experience to then take away from that, rather than just the sadness or the feelings of loss. Just read it, and just having a reread of my notes here. So these rememberings, they reveal what is often referenced in the saying, you have all the answers within, when we simply ask, why is this coming up for us? And notice coming up. So all emotions seem to come up. I would say it's a prompt from the gut feeling. It's the you inverse. The universe is you inverse. So if we can identify the negative associations, can we then find the positive associations with it? Now, what is reflected in the external world, quite literally in the material sense, is in material. So, for example, a shirt or a blouse will be based on, say, collar size or chest size, but it takes in no account of the length of the arms or the torso. So that's an inverse reflection of there is no one size fits all. Likewise, specific dates that have significance to you won't apply to everybody else. So it's just a very rough sort of blueprint to sort of look at all of these things. Where are we? See, if we leave these things unaddressed, we don't see them for what they really are, see them in the balance. Just refer back to my notes again here. What they actually become are anchor points. Now, the human body is described as a vessel. So if you're anchoring yourself to set dates and things that hold a negative significance, you've basically become like that guard dog that is fixed to a chain, to a spike in the ground, so it can only go in a certain circle. It can't go beyond the limit of how far that chain will allow that dog to go. We've fixed ourselves, and we have effectively crucified ourselves by fixing to certain things. Let me give you almost like a contradiction now to this. Now, today is March the 22nd. I take March the 21st to be the start of the year. Why March the 21st? Apart from it is Aries the first, or is the first to arise. What you actually have, if you, with the observation of the sun, actually, before we just get on to that, part of it is because there have been 21 days that have been skipped, 10 in 1582 and another 11 in 1752, because things are going out in alignment on this imposed calendar from the church. So as much as anything else, it's like, I'm not accepting your nonsense and your skipping days, I shall put them back. So we move to the 21st. I'll accept the zodiac, but I'll go with 21st of each month as being the start of the month, as it were. There's also something I alluded to or mentioned a long time ago now in video about pay 21s, because you've got 21 days there in the card game of pontoon, and pontoon being a bridge, so a bridge implies crossing from one place to another. So on that alone, it feels right to put those 21 days back and start each month or each zodiac sign on the 21st. But there's also the solar observation that comes into this. So if you start on the equinox, the imbalance, if we follow the course of the sun, it will rise. It will reach the summer solstice, its highest point. Then it will start its descent. It will come back to the center point, the equinox, with the fall. But it then will go down further, keeping it in balance to the high with the low. But then when we reach the winter solstice, it rises again and comes back to center. So over the course of a year, you get to experience the hot, the cold, and everything in between. In the case of what are called annuals in the world of flowers, you'll see the growth, you'll see the bloom, you'll see the slow decay, you'll see the dying off, and then when you get back to March again, you'll see the rebirth. But of course, you can take this the other way round as well and get the same result. So if we were to start with the fall equinox, which you could say is the fool's journey, from that center point, that start, you would experience the low first, the cold, the less pleasant. You will witness the dying off, but then you'll see the rebirth, and then you'll see the rising, and you'll reach a high point once you've passed over that spring equinox, and then you will come back to balance with the summer solstice. So whichever way you were to take as being the new year, the start of the new year, whether you take the spring or the fall equinox, is going to bring you back into center. And a very constant theme with this spiritual journey is about being in balance, being able to see the summer and the winter, to experience both. And if you consider that path of the sun is very much like the sine wave on the heart monitor, for example. So it will go up and drop down, come up and drop down, the same cycle as the sun, the same cycle as the ebb and the flow of the tides as well, and also our internal flow. I also want to bring into this something I don't feel anybody else has spotted. If you've ever seen those Disney Pixar films, the logo for the Pixar part is like one of those angle pose lamps. It's got a base and it's basically like an arm with an elbow, and then you can, the light in it turns and faces you as you're looking at the screen. It seems to be referencing let thine eye be singular in that. If we break down Pixar, for example, you've got pi, right in the middle you have the X, the cross, and then you have R or Ra in reverse being shown there. Another little observation I've made, you've probably seen this depiction of that sketch of that man who sort of pops his head beyond the firmament and sees what is beyond. But look closely at that illustration and consider that it is only his head that goes through. The body remains in this reality. I feel that is being shown there, and I don't feel anybody else has actually picked that up. Just a little observation. It's basically is all centered around the balance, the topic of this video. What else have we got here? Yeah, we've covered all that part, and I've dropped my pieces of paper again. Right, I think we'll end this video here because I want to talk about the pyramids in the context of this as above, so below. which I feel will end up doubling the length of this video. So I'll end this one here and carry on and make a part 2 to this. So as always, unconditional love to you all.